The Middle East continues to change right before our eyes, but some of the old pathologies remain. And when Donald Trump comes into office, we're going to have to handle those too. I'll have details coming up on In Focus. So when I was trying to figure out what to talk about today, a couple of key stories caught my eye. And two of them talk about the major changes that we've been seeing in the Middle East. And then a couple more talk about the things that simply aren't going anywhere. And if anything, they're getting worse. So the first one that caught my eye was from the Times of Israel. Their reporter in Washington spoke to two U.S. officials, intel officials, and one Israeli. And they all acknowledged, well, the Americans acknowledged, and I guess the Israeli agreed that they had gotten Lebanon and Hezbollah completely wrong. The Americans blamed Israel or said, actually, the Israeli intelligence people had the same assessment as we do, and it was exposed as totally wrong. And what was the intelligence assessment that they both shared? They shared the assessment that Israel was going to provoke a massive war if it attacks Hezbollah. So that's why, for months and months and months, the Americans were insisting that Israel not attack Hezbollah. Israel's military was suing under Yoav Gallant, the former defense minister, to reach some sort of diplomatic accord with Hezbollah, even if that required Israel to make territorial concessions to Hezbollah of its own sovereign territory in the Golan Heights. And it was just, we can't do it. They're too powerful. It's too big. We're going to lose too much. The losses will be cataclysmic. And they were talking about anywhere between hundreds and thousands of Israelis killed in Hezbollah missile strikes. And, Israel mustn't dare go after Hezbollah. And so this was what was guiding both the United States and the Israeli intelligence services up until September. And what happened that Israel decided anyway that we had to go at it? Netanyahu, according to the report, it said, no, it doesn't matter. We have to take the risk. We have no choice. We have to decimate Hezbollah. We have to do it. And here I should remind you that the Israeli intelligence services, the IDF, Herzi Halevi, the chief of staff, Yoav Gallant, then defense minister, were totally opposed to the Beeper operation, which completely destroyed Hezbollah's leadership. And Sarah, I just want to read you a little excerpt from the Times of Israel report. It says here, U.S. intelligence assessments before Israel escalated its conflict against the Lebanese Hezbollah terror group in September said that such a move risks sparking an all-out war in which hundreds, if not thousands, of Israelis would be killed. 3 U.S. officials and 1 Israeli official told the Times of Israel. The assessment relied heavily on similar ones crafted by Israel's own intelligence community, the U.S. officials say, acknowledging that in both countries' assessments, the assessments proved wildly inaccurate within days as the IDF methodically took out much of Hezbollah's missile and drone capabilities, dismantled its military infrastructure in southern Lebanon, picked off almost every member of its senior leadership, and killed or wounded thousands of operatives, many of them in audacious mass detonations of the terror group's communications devices. So we took out almost their entire leadership in these audacious actions. And here we have to remember, again, Herzi Halevi and Gallant opposed the Beeper operation. It was going to be a sound and let show. It wasn't going to be a big deal. And then, Netanyahu ordered it, and it decimated Hezbollah's leadership, and it caused almost no collateral damage. Almost nobody other than the terrorists themselves, including the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon, who also had a Hezbollah beeper, were wounded in this attack, and it decommissioned their entire leadership, killed or wounded their entire leadership. And our military intelligence, our military leadership opposed it, as, of course, the U.S. did. Not only did they oppose it, but there was a criminal leak to Yediot Ahronot and New York Times reporter Ronen Bergman, who already said the night before the attack, he reported that Israel was considering some audacious, highly incendiary or irresponsible operations in Lebanon. And, he basically gave Hezbollah a heads up, which is why it had to apparently be pushed up, the operation, because they were afraid that they were going to lose all of the capabilities that Israel had amassed over 5 years because somebody in the IDF was trying to block it, which is shocking, and it's also a form of treason, I must say. At any rate, the person who insisted that Israel go forward no matter what the losses, because, of course, we're talking about to 100,000 Israeli civilians who have been internal refugees since October 8th when they were evacuated from their homes because of a fear that Hezbollah was going to carry out an October 7th type massacre of them along the border with Lebanon, that Hezbollah had a plan that they had already published to invade and conquer the Galilee and massacre the Israelis who live there. And so they've been internal refugees since October 8th, 2023. And Netanyahu said, we just can't keep going. We have to do what we have to do no matter what the cost. And we went forward, and guess what? We got a miracle, right? We went forward, we were brave, we were courageous, and it worked out that if Hezbollah wasn't an empty shell, it was a shell that we were able to decimate by blowing up their beepers and killing Nasrallah and a bunch of other things. So that was a massive action, and it took an enormous amount of courage because it was essentially going up against the entire military leadership of the IDF by doing this. And here the Americans are acknowledging belatedly, we got it totally wrong. And by the way, so did the Israeli intelligence services, which we have to remember, the same intelligence services that missed October 7th. At any rate, so that's one of the things. So thanks, Netanyahu. And then the second one is another report that was reported in the Israeli media yesterday, and I mean, it was reported everywhere, I think I would assume, yesterday, which is that the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog, the International Nuclear Energy Agency, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, gave a statement where he said there's no point in trying to hold Iran to Obama's 2015 nuclear deal any longer because they're totally in breach of everything. Like, you can't talk to them about not stockpiling beyond a certain level or a certain quantity of uranium that's been enriched to 3.68% because they're already, they have enough fissile nuclear material that they've enriched to 60% to build, 12 nuclear bombs if they want to, ratchet it up a little bit more to 90%, and then you have bomb-grade nuclear material. So he's saying Iran is already a threshold nuclear state. In other words, the 2015 deal that Obama and John Kerry and all of their, clackers in the media and everybody in their Washington echo chamber were saying that this was really great and this was going to put, as Anthony Blinken to this day keeps saying, put Iran's nuclear program into a box. It didn't put anything into a box. This was an open road to nuclear capabilities, which Iran used. It was all a lie. Iran breached every single aspect of that deal, and they did it from the outset. I mean, they were already stockpiling more enriched uranium than they were allowed to under the deal from the get-go, right? And they expanded their uranium enrichment to 20% and then later to 60%. And so the whole thing was a lie. And the Israeli military was going along with it. Gantz, Benny Gantz, Gadi Eisenkot, the former chiefs of staff of the army, they were opposed to President Trump's decision to withdraw from the nuclear deal in 2019. They supported Obama's plan. They refused to harshly criticize it. They refused to back the one person who led the campaign worldwide against a nuclear deal with Iran, who said that this was just a open road to a nuclear arsenal. What was his name? Oh, let's guess. Oh, that's right, Benjamin Netanyahu. So Rafael Grossi said yesterday that the JCPOA, as it's called, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, just bureaucratese for a bunch of garbage, right? That they claimed falsely, and it was obvious at the time for anybody who actually read the contents of the deal that it was a total lie. This wasn't a nuclear non-proliferation agreement. It was a nuclear proliferation agreement. And, they all lied together. And not only did they all lie together, they transformed the one person who was warning, who was saying the emperor has no clothes, who was pooping at their party, right? Benjamin Netanyahu, into enemy number one of civilization and nuclear nonproliferation, because here he was making these horrible statements, acknowledging that, in fact, they had put together a nuclear proliferation deal with Tehran. They were giving an open path to nuclear capabilities to the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, a regime that was sworn to annihilate not only Israel, but the United States of America, the little Satan and the great Satan. And so here's Rafael Grossi, none other than Rafael Grossi, saying, in fact, he was right. Iran is now a threshold nuclear state, and we're going to have to think about another way to try to pin them in. Let me think. Could F-35s maybe help? I think they're the only thing that can help at this point. And bunker buster bombs, the same bunker buster bombs that the administration, the Biden administration, has systematically refused to give to Israel, for months and months and months, because they don't want, because this is the same administration that signed the deal. In 2015, it's a continuation of Obama. And like Obama, that was the whole purpose of the nuclear deal of 2015. And it's almost reached fruition. So why would they want to stop it now? And so again, these are two extraordinary things. Iran is a nuclear breakout, and Hezbollah is destroyed. Assad is no more. And Netanyahu, he had this great appearance. He got off from court for a day in order to go do what? He went to the top of the Hermon mountain with the head of the army and the head of the Shin Bet and all of the rest of these brilliant people who gave us such good ideas all along. But he went there and he said, look, we're going to stay here at least till the end of 2025. We have to see if there's going to be a way for us not to be here. Right now there isn't. And he's right, of course. So Obama's claim that you could, somehow or another appease or reach a meeting of the mind with the mullahs is a total lie, except to the extent that he didn't mind if they became a nuclear power, right? I mean, if he wanted them to become a nuclear power, which is what many, many people were claiming, including myself all along the line, then this is exactly the outcome that he wants. But aside from that, everything stands in ruins because Israel, by being brave, by being incredibly courageous, particularly our soldiers, and going into places where everybody said it couldn't be done, right? We got this far. We've torn apart Iran's axis of terrorism, and it's extraordinary. And here's Iran. Yeah, it's a threshold nuclear state, as Grossi said, but you know what? It can be bombed. It can still be bombed, and it should be bombed very, very quickly. Okay, now that I've shown, this is what happened. This is what happens when you have courage. This is what happens when you have the courage of your conviction. And this is what you do, by the way. You go against the warnings of all of the people who are supposed to know best. The NSA, the CIA, the DIA, the blah, 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 the blah, 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 the Mossad, the Shabak, Israel military intelligence. And you say, we have to do it. And why did he think it was so important to do it? Because he knows that the ideology of people like the late, thanks to him, Hassan Nasrallah and Ali Khamenei and Ismail Haniyeh and all of these jihadists, including Giuliani, the guy who's now running around parading as the new moderate jihadist taking over Syria, right? They mean it. They believe in jihad. They believe in their ideology, just as Hitler believed in his ideology in the 1930s. And the only person who believed him at that time was Churchill. So Prime Minister Netanyahu said, no, you have to take these people seriously. Look what happened on October 7th. They proved that they're serious. And anybody who doesn't take Hassan Nasrallah seriously when he says that he's going to bury us is burying us, is giving him the ability to do what he wants to do, what he intends to do, what he aspires to do, and what he's trained to do and armed to do. So we can't allow that, no matter what the cost. We have to prevent that from happening. And that's why we went into Lebanon. And like I said, we got a miracle, like Nachshon, the son of Aminadab, who jumped into the Red Sea. And who jumped? Our soldiers. And who told them to jump? Netanyahu. All right. Now, here are some stories that show that a lot hasn't changed. So the first story is a JNS story here, just put it up, that outgoing, thankfully, but still very much, Secretary of State Tony Blinken met with the parents of a Turkish-American named Isor Ay, or Agi, who was, like I said, she was a Turkish-American, a dual citizen of Turkey and the United States, and she was killed in Shem, I think, in Nablus in September So who is Ay? She was an activist for the terror-adjacent, Hamas-adjacent International Solidarity Movement. This is a group whose members are barred from entering Israel, so she clearly entered Israel under false pretenses. She came into Israel on a tourist visa, and she joined ISM terror boosters in Samaria, and she joined them. And the day that she was killed, she was engaged together with terrorists and other terror-adjacent activists from ISM and other anarchist organizations or pro-Hamas organizations in carrying out a riot against IDF forces in the area. Okay, and they were attacking an IDF patrol. The IDF shot back, and she was killed in the crossfire, according to an IDF report. Okay, so this is a woman who is American and Turkish, but most importantly, she's supporting a terrorist organization. She's actively enabling them to carry out violent acts against the Israel Defense Forces in a war zone, in a battle zone in Shem in September, and she's killed. Okay, and how did the Biden administration respond to this? By condemning Israel. So Biden condemned Israel, and here I just want to give you a quote from an earlier JNS piece that wrote up the U.S. response to Ay's killing. It says here, so Biden, like I said, he condemned it, and then Kamala Harris, remember her? She was a woman who was like this close to becoming the next president of the United States, and this is what she said in her statement after Ay was killed. She said, She denounced her death as a horrific tragedy that never should have happened. And then she went on. She said, Doug Emhoff, her husband, her Jewish husband, let's not forget, Doug and I are keeping her family and loved ones in our prayers. Isor was peacefully protesting in the West Bank, standing up against the expansion of settlements. While her young life was senselessly cut short, no one should be killed for participating in a peaceful protest, the vice president continued. According to Harris, Ay's accidental death, quote, raises legitimate questions about the conduct of IDF personnel in the West Bank. Israel must do more to ensure that incidents like this never happen again. Added, she wasn't done yet. Israel's preliminary investigation indicated it was a result of a tragic error for which the IDF is responsible. We will continue to press the government of Israel for answers and for continued access to the findings of the investigation so that we can have confidence in the results. There must be full accountabilities. So I have to say that this is absolutely reminiscent of another incident where you had another American, who was an American Palestinian named Shirin Abu Akleh, who was a 25-year, I think, veteran correspondent for the Qatari jihad-enabling, jihad-inciting Al Jazeera network, right? And so Shirin Abu Akleh, who we found out was an American citizen, after she was killed, she had no known association with the United States, no travel to the United States, no study in the United States, but whatever. The State Department announced that she was an American citizen after her death. And how was she killed? She was killed in May 2022 in the middle of a pitched gunfight, okay, where she was embedded with Islamic Jihad terrorists who were shooting at IDF forces in Jenin in northern Samaria. Okay, so she was standing with terrorists who were engaged in a gunfight against IDF forces with terrorists. Now, Islamic Jihad, we should note, is a terrorist organization entirely controlled by Iran. So she's with Iranian-controlled terrorists in Jenin who are shooting at IDF forces, and she gets killed. And what does the Biden administration say? Same thing. They condemned Israel for the senseless killing of a journalist, okay? And then they launched an investigation into the IDF forces who were engaged. So they were carrying out, effectively, the FBI has carried out a war crimes, effectively, investigation against IDF forces who were engaged in a counter-terrorist battle in the city of Jenin in May of 2022, and a terror-adjacent journalist who was embedded with members of an illegal terrorist organization controlled by Iran was killed. And Israel is now being investigated, or was investigated, and the investigation went on, right? They didn't let go of this for her death, which is insane, right? But it, of course, is also reminiscent of everything that they've done in Gaza all along, constantly threatening us and accusing and gaslighting us and saying that we're deliberately starving Gazans when they've received, half a ton of food per person. It's 3,000 calories per day. That's more than people are supposed to eat unless they're, whatever. I mean, it's crazy, right? So they're making these preposterous allegations against us, Samantha Power, Hadi Amar, Meyer, Bitar, and all of these other people. And here you have this expressed, and in his last days in office, Tony Blinken meets with this ISM activist who was engaged in terror supporting activities at the time of her death in September, in the middle of a war, right? Because Israel is at war. And he meets with her parents to explain that, yes, we're going to be holding Israel accountable, and we can't comment, said Miller, the spokesman for the State Department, on ongoing investigations. You have to talk to the Justice Department. So the Justice Department, are they investigating this as a criminal case as well? Well, according to Kamala Harris, the outgoing vice president, the United States wants to make sure that Israel isn't hiding information here. Now, there are two things that we have to say about this. One is, all of us are thinking, okay, well, look, the executive order that Joe Biden issued on February 1st against settler violence, just in parentheses, is a slander that the Biden administration created to try to draw moral equivalence between Israeli civilians in Judea and Samaria and Palestinian terrorists. At any rate, the allegations of violence on the part of settlers has come from organizations like ISM. Early on in the war, I think in November even, I did a whole show about the pipeline of anarchists from organizations, including ISM, that go directly to the State Department, so that in one day there was a provocation of IDF forces outside of the community of Susia in the morning in Israel, and by the evening in the United States, the President of the United States standing next to the anti-Israel Prime Minister of Australia in a news conference was excoriating settler violence based on false claims that were submitted to the State Department along the line in this pipeline, of which ISM is a full member, of slanders and blood libels against Israeli civilians and soldiers that go and get parroted not only in the State Department, but also in the White House by President Biden, thanks to his ISM supporting the senior officials who work in the National Security Council, who work in the State Department in key nodes that then shape American policy towards Israel and the Palestinians. Right? So this is Tony Blinken. So that's first of all, Tony Blinken is doing this to this last day in office. Why? Now, you know that Trump is planning on or is expected to cancel the executive order and cancel the sanctions that Biden has placed on Israelis who have committed no crimes and had no due process rights or anything. And then they got their bank accounts frozen and have been barred entry into the United States like they're international drug lords, right? So he's expected to cancel those sanctions. So why do they keep doing this? They do this because they're using it as a starting off point for going and even expanding more their political warfare, their treatment of Israeli civilians and soldiers as terrorists when they get their next, bite at that apple, when they're back in power, whenever that may be. And so it's very important to understand that. I think we had 40 Democratic lawmakers wrote a letter to Joe Biden over the past couple of days demanding that he place a full arms embargo on Israel. So this is all of a piece. The other aspect to this is that it enables terrorists to then go after Israelis, our soldiers, our civilians, etc. So here I just want to say I found this thing on Twitter yesterday that I was stunned by. It's this organization called the Hind Rajab Foundation, which is an organization that claims that they want to seek justice for the genocide that Israel is carrying out against the Palestinians in Gaza, right? And this is, we don't have to regurgitate all of the blood libels at once, but here's, one big one, right? That we who are fighting a genocidal society, essentially, that is organized around the principle of annihilating the Jews, we're the ones that are being accused of genocide, even though all of Hamas's statistics on deaths have been shown to be, most recently just a couple of days ago in a follow-on article in Tablet Magazine, to be totally preposterous and total lies, right? But whatever. So this organization is going after individual Israeli soldiers. They're going after individual Israeli soldiers. And I see this thing. There's this a man named Diab Abu Jaja. So he works for this foundation, okay? And they are going here. I'm just looking at their Twitter feed right now as I speak to you. So they're going after our soldiers. They post photographs of soldiers who took pictures of themselves, posted them on their Facebook pages that they were in Gaza, and they're accusing them of war crimes. So if they find out that Soldier X, who posted photos of himself and his brothers in arms in Gaza on his Facebook page or on his Telegram page or whatever, they use it as proof that these are war criminals, and they call for the issuance of arrest warrants against our soldiers who may be vacationing in Thailand or, in South America or whatever. And I see they have put up pictures of our soldiers. And they're asking for authorities here, breaking Israeli war criminal, seen in a video boasting about killing Palestinian civilian and mocking their body as a trophy. So this is all a lie, right? I mean, he's in battle. He's been at war, and now he's in Sri Lanka, and they're calling for authorities in Colombo to arrest him. Right, so they say here on their thing that they already have 26 IDF soldiers who are outside of the country in their crosshairs that they're trying to arrest. Now, what's interesting about Abu Jaja, so as soon as I saw his name, it's his name that you don't forget, Abu Jaja. Abu Jaja was one of the heads of the European Muslim League that was active in the 2000s, and they carried out, just like we've seen since October 7th, these violent riots against Israel and Jews, calling for death to Israel, death to the Jews, including in Antwerp, where he was living at the time. He was arrested in 2002, calling for the massacre of the Jewish community of Antwerp. He had the diamond exchange, I think, in Antwerp that was put on alert after he called for them to be killed. Okay, so this is a terrorist. ISM's leader praised October 7th on October 8th. They want Hamas, Hezbollah, to annihilate Israel, to annihilate the Jews. They support it, and they call for action against the Jewish communities in other countries as well, in Abu Jaja's case in Belgium. Okay, and now he's repackaged himself as a human rights activist for Hamas, right, going after our soldiers. Right? And why is he able to do this? Because he gets a backwind from the United States of America under the Biden administration that's been doing a wink, wink, nod, nod to the ICC for putting out arrest warrants against our prime minister and former defense minister, and to these organizations like International Solidarity Movement, which are terror adjacent or actual terrorist organizations, or ISM members carried out the suicide bombing at the Mike's Place bar in Tel Aviv in the shadow of the U.S. Embassy there in 2003. Okay, so these are groups that have actual ties to terrorists, whose members have been terrorists, suicide bombers, all right, ISM, International Solidarity Movement, and the administration has been working with them. So the United States of America, under the Biden administration, the State Department, treats these anarchists, these terror-adjacent organizations as legitimate. They credit their claims, they credence their claims of Israeli war crimes and investigate our soldiers who engage in lawful combat operations against terrorist organizations that are recognized as terrorist organizations by the State Department itself. And then by doing that, they clear a path for this abuse of our soldiers and our elected officials by these international organizations like the ICC, the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice at The Hague, and other forms, including the law enforcement officials in separate states. Okay? And so, these are pathologies that the administration is going to the new incoming administration is going to have to end. They're going to have to stop investigating IDF forces for war crimes when we're carrying out a war for our national survival against terrorist organizations whose entire doctrine is a war crime, right? And this just has to stop. Not just the executive order, this entire acceptance, its intake of information as legitimate coming from these non-government organizations that are anarchist organizations, that are anti-Semitic organizations, that are terror-adjacent organizations, terror-aligned organizations, terror-supporting organizations, right? As if these are legitimate sources of information to then open up criminal probes against Israel. This whole thing just has to end. It has to. And then, I'll just do the second story that I wanted to talk about, which was here. I want you to see a clip. It's in Hebrew, but it has English subtitles that was put out by former Prime Minister, Defense Minister, IDF Chief of Staff, and multi-bazillionaire Ehud Barak. I saw it was posted on Twitter, I think, a day or two ago by this organization, this anarchist Israeli organization that's trying to overthrow the government of Israel called Unacceptable. They've been organizing all of these anti-government riots. They were doing it in the year leading up to October 7th, and they're trying to renew their operations now. So just look at what he says to them.
ממשלה בלתי לגיטימית בעליל, שדגל שחור מתנוסס מעל מהלכיה בפועל וכוונותיה לעתיד. ביום בו יפוטר מי משומרי הסף, היועמ"שית או ראש השב"כ, או יופרו שוב בבוטות צווי עשה של הבג"ץ, יוותר המרי האזרחי, או בשפה מדויקת אי ציות אזרחי בלתי אלים, הברירה היחידה של פטריוטים בחברה חפצת חיים. מי שאמורים להוביל את המרי האזרחי הם ראשי האופוזיציה. הם נדרשים להתייצב יחד ולומר, אנחנו לא מקימים גוש, אנחנו חלוקים בהרבה דברים, אבל מאוחדים בדבר אחד, שראש הממשלה איננו כשיר, ופעולות ממשלתו אינן לגיטימיות, פוגעות בביטחון ובדמוקרטיה, ומובילות את ישראל לתהום. הם חייבים לקרוא להשבתת המדינה 24/7 חוץ משירותי החירום. הם חייבים בדוגמה אישית להודיע שחברי הכנסת שלהם, והם בראשם, מפסיקים את השתתפותם בדיוני המליאה ויכנסו מחדש רק לדיון על פיזור הכנסת. והם אמורים לקרוא לאזרחי המדינה להצטרף אליהם לשביתת שבט מסביב לכנסת עד לפיזורה. מעשים אלה יעניקו להם את התוקף המוסרי לקרוא לכל גורמי הכוח במדינה להצטרף להשבתה הכללית.
Right, so Ehud Barak is calling for civil war. That's what he's saying, right? He's saying that if the government fires the attorney general, fires the chief of staff, fires any of the people that they have decided, rightly, I think, are their representatives, their non-elected representatives that are gumming up the work and trying to paralyze the operations of the government, the normal operation of the government, then they're gonna paralyze the country. And they're gonna general strike, they're gonna everything that they did before October 7th, barricade the Knesset, harass members of Knesset engaged in their lawful duties as public officials, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's what they're planning on doing, right? That's what he said. He's laying it out right there. By the way, Unacceptable said that they're gonna help the anti-Trump people go after Trump and gum up the works against Trump using the lessons learned that they've accrued from their anti-government operations against the Israeli government. So that's interesting, just so you know, like they view themselves, they're a group of Israelis who emigrated to the United States, and Barak is talking to them, so it's sort of an interesting mix here. So that's what's happening with him. And Ehud Barak, this wasn't the only reason that he made the news this week. He also made the news because the United States just approved, this is, part of the whole backdoor, let's get stuff done, let's clean the desk, let's give pardons to absolutely everybody we can think of who's on our side, preemptive or after the fact pardons to thousands and thousands and thousands of people that Biden is doing. So they also did something else. I think it was in 2020 or 19, Ehud Barak, together with a man named Ehud Schneerson, who was the head of the IDF Signals Intelligence Unit 8200, they formed a cyber security firm called Paragon that had a cyber worm called Graphite. And they essentially cooperated with the United States to destroy Israel's cybersecurity industry. And what they did was we had these, I've spoken about it in the past, we had these cybersecurity groups like NSO, Candira, and many others that were world leaders in the area. And so we had this weird situation where out of nowhere popped this group called Citizen Lab in the University of Toronto, and they started attacking NSO and saying that they were rogue criminal group because they were undermining the civil rights, the human rights of civil rights activists and of journalists. And so they were besmirching NSO. Most of their allegations against NSO were exposed as false, but only when it was too late. And in the meantime, as NSO and other Israeli cybersecurity firms were being attacked in the media in the West, they formed Paragon. And what they did and so NSO and Candira were Israeli firms, and they worked with the Prime Minister's office and they were tools both against terrorism and also for diplomacy. And they played a key role in kind of priming the pump for the Abraham Accords with their work in the Arab world. That was, of course, proved by the government because they're Israeli firms and they advanced Israel's national interests. So what Ehud Barak and Ehud Schneerson did was they went to this lobbying firm that was formed by Obama administration alumni, most importantly, Tony Blinken, Avril Haines, who's now the outgoing director of national intelligence, and some others. And they said to him, look, they said to the Americans, look, what we're going to do is we have this company we founded, which also has a cyber tool and called Graphite. And what we're going to do is we're going to act as your company, as like a Democratic Party equity, basically, not Israeli. And we're only going to work with companies that you allow us to work with. Okay? So that's what they did. So they were using Israeli technology, Israeli know-how that was all developed in Unit 8200 that Schneerson had just completed his duties as commander of that unit. He also convinced a lot of his senior officers there to quit the IDF and join him and work for him. So he really undermined the unit itself, the signals intelligence unit itself, by bringing them all out of the IDF. And then they turned what they used. They used all of their know-how that they got from the IDF in order to advance the interests of these Democratic Party operatives. And then lo and behold, it was called West Exec, the company that Blinken and Michelle Flournoy and Avril Haines and Dan Shapiro led. And then Biden was inaugurated in January, and towards the end of 2021, they put all of the Israeli cybersecurity firms except Paragon on the blacklist, that weren't allowed to operate in the United States, work with Americans. They weren't allowed to travel to the United States. They destroyed the Israel cybersecurity industry in one fell swoop, except for one firm, which was Paragon. And Paragon got a deal with the Drug Enforcement Agency, and that's it. So Paragon sitting in the catbird seat, they've destroyed one of the most important strategic tools that Israel developed, which was cybersecurity. And now, as Biden cleans his desk, it just announced that Paragon was sold to an American private equity firm in Florida, in Boca Raton, for $900 million. And, it's an interesting story, and it would be really interesting, right, if the Commerce Department under the Trump administration would look into Paragon and the sale and its relations with U.S. intelligence, et cetera, and the Democratic Party. These are all very interesting things. And it's important to know why was such a rush to approve this sale now and before January 20th. What was that about? So all of these things, and it was also for below market rate, apparently, according to one of the stories that I saw about it. So it was all sort of a very rushed sale that went through now very quickly. This is important because there are all kinds of ties that should be ended between the Pentagon and Israeli activists, between the FBI and Israeli activists, between the State Department. This is subversion of an allied government. And in the case of these ISM activists and these terror-embedded journalists from Al Jazeera, which itself is a terrorist-linked network. This is not conducive to, safety of Americans either, to U.S. national security. And so these things have to be looked into. It has to be looked into what was going on with Israeli cybersecurity firm Paragon and the Democratic Party, and how that impacts things in the United States going forward. All of these things have to be checked. And one last note I'll just give you in housekeeping. So today, Netanyahu is back on the witness stand after an incredible trip to the top of the Golan in the demilitarized zone that Israel's taken over in Syria. Yesterday, he's back on the stage. And so in his bribery indictment, they claimed that he and his family had requested and received preferential treatment from this anti-Netanyahu website called Walla News on 315 separate occasions. So his attorney insists that they go through all 315 and see what's going on. So today, so far, as I broadcast this or as I tape this show, his attorney had already gone through 82 of the 315. I think he went through 9 on Sunday, and they were all proven to have had no relationship to Netanyahu or his family whatsoever. They had no involvement in any of these 82 what are they called? The clauses in the indictment. They were all supposedly separate, discrete incidents that were part of the bribery overall, that they received untoward leniency and coverage or whatever, and it was a total lie. And so the prosecutor looks at this, she's like, oh, can I have a little bit of time to just go over the indictment really quietly? It's been 4 years after all. This from the woman who insisted that the prime minister of Israel that's leading Israel in the seven-front war, right, that he has to leave everything 18 hours a week, 3 days a week, 6 hours a day in order to talk about her silly, stupid, crappy, fallen apart, destroyed indictment on the witness stand in a Tel Aviv courtroom. So, I mean, this is where things stand. So Barak is making bank in the waning days of the administration while calling for civil war. Tony Blinken is meeting with the parents of an ISM terror-adjacent, terror-supporting activist who was killed while they were engaged in violent assault against IDF forces in Samaria. And Israel, in the meantime, thanks to Netanyahu, has changed the Middle East. And Iran still has to be dealt with. But this is where we are. There are pathologies that must be dealt with. They must be ended in the next couple of years, because they just can't go on. They everything that we achieved, the fantastic things, the earthquake in the Middle East that has gone on over the past, year and 2 months or we've achieved because of the incredible fight that our men have put up and the courage of our leader and of our people. It's all ending. It's all going to disappear if we allow these pathologies to persist. We have to be able to capitalize on the moment. The Middle East is changing. We're winning. The good guys are winning. We have to move forward and do it. But with all of these things on the side that keep persisting, the demonization of Israel, of our soldiers, of our elected leaders, the empowerment of anarchists inside of Israeli society, who are corrupt, who work with the Democratic Party, geared towards overthrowing the government of Israel. And look what it's accomplished. All of that has to end. Anyway, those are my thoughts, and I'll see you again next week. Take care.